For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 76, printed in Part B of House Report number 115-295, offered by Mr. Correa of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 500, the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment, which seeks to allocate $100 million to procure additional ships for our Coast Guard to interdict drugs headed to the United States by sea. Last year was a record-breaking year for the U.S. Coast Guard in its fight against drug trafficking. It seized 416 pounds of cocaine worth almost $6 billion. This was the result of more than 250 individual interdictions in the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and Eastern Pacific Ocean. Even with this record-breaking year, however, all of the cocaine that was seized represents less than 10% of all attempted shipments. And of course, cocaine interdictions, cocaine shipments is on the rise. I do commend the men and women of the U.S. Coast Guard for their great work they do to stop our drug trafficking to our country, yet the Coast Guard lacks the resources to stop the known drug shipments into our mainland. During a Homeland Security hearing this year, U.S. Coast Guard Commandant Admiral, and I paraphrase him, said, last year there were almost 600 events that we just did not have enough ships or enough planes to track or stop them in the seas. The Admiral said there were almost 600 shipments in the high seas. They knew these ships were carrying drugs, yet we did not have the ships or the assets to stop them. Vice Admiral Charles Ray went further to say, we need more cutters on the water to help us do our job. The Coast Guard, like many other government agencies, has endured tough budget situations over the years, and they need to replace and add new ships to fulfill their drug interdiction mission. This $100 million would allow the Coast Guard to procure 2 additional fast response cutters. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Once again, as I said before, with the gentlelady's amendment cutting beds, that will weaken the United States border security, and the hiring of additional ICE agents is needed to protect our communities, prevent terrorism, reduce crime through vigorous enforcement of immigration and custom laws. Successful border control and immigration system must be supported by enforcement of pertinent laws. This bill recommends $240 million for 4 fast response cutters, the same amount requested. Same as the amount requested. The program is on schedule and on budget, and there's no need to accelerate the procurement of additional ships. And we have been building those on time without flaws now for 4 years? 4 years at that same rate. We are we're building a lot of fast response cutters very quickly. We have now a new program for the offshore patrol cutter, which we are the first of the contracts will be has been let, and that is in the process of being built, and we have a projection for multiple of those cutters. Taking away from our ability to detain people who have broken the law is not a good resource for growing a program that is already very robust and very effective and has put online multiple fast response cutters. So for those reasons, I oppose, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Chairman, I would say that, on the contrary, this money, this allocation of $100 million represents additional support for our border security, our high seas. You know, back in my district, like across the country, we have a major spike and increase in drug overdoses, deaths as a result of drug overdoses. Our children are being harmed by these drugs that are coming into our country. Our Coast Guard, our admirals of the Coast Guard are saying this is where the chinks in the armor are in terms of our national defense of our country, of our borders, the high seas. These are not speculation. These are facts. Ships are coming into our high seas loaded with drugs. We do not have the assets to stop them. Nothing could be further from the truth. On the contrary, these $100 million, an additional 2 ships for the Coast Guard, represents tons and tons of drugs to be intercepted in the years to come. Billions and billions of dollars stopped before they reach our land. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Even if this money should be moved and the gentleman's amendment be approved, it wouldn't mean that any more fast response cutters would be built in this calendar year. But I'm fairly certain that the Commandant of the Coast Guard would say that we have been very robust and very effective at producing fast response cutters. And I believe that the detention beds as a deterrent for those coming across the border and for those violating the law is an important part of the defense of the borders and the people of the United States. And therefore, I continue to oppose and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that those folks that are piloting those ships full of drugs coming into our country do not deserve the opportunity to reach our shores. We have to stop them in the high seas. Just a few months ago, the Coast Guard was proposed for budget cuts. Now they're barely keeping balance, meaning no budget cuts. All I want to do with this amendment is give them additional resources to stop drug shipments, known drug shipments on the high seas before they reach our shores. I don't want to go back to my district. I don't want to go back to California and say that I'm not doing everything we can do to stop those drugs from reaching our children. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman has the only remaining time. Gentleman's recognized.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
I would like to ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 77.